1600.
WWRL.
New York.
An Access One communications radio station.
Yetta Kurland's on the air. It's Yetta Kurland live. Yetta Kurland, listen in.
Good evening, New York, and welcome to this week's edition of Yetta Kurland Live. Happy Hanukkah as well on this 12-12-12 edition of Yetta Kurland Live. I'm your host, Yetta Kurland, and tonight we will be speaking with the Executive Director of the Empire State Pride Agenda, Nathan Schaefer, the filmmaker, Antonino and Martine Perna of Antibalas. We'll also hear from City and State New York editor Morgan Pehme. I first want to thank our media partners, Go Magazine, Labor Press, the Soho Journal, Westview News, City and State New York, and the New Civil Rights Movement for helping make this show happen, as well as our community sponsors, the Ritz and Whole Earth Bakery. You can pick up a copy of Westview News at 69 Charles Street or check out Go Magazine. You can do that at local newsstands or on gomag.com. City and State New York is online at cityandstateny.com, the Soho Journal at sohojournal.com, the New Civil Rights Movement at thenewcivilrightsmovement.com, and Labor Press is at laborpress.org. Also, you can listen to us live stream at WWRL1600.com, and please join us on Facebook at Yetta Kurland Live or on Twitter at Yetta Kurland, and check us out as well on Huffington Post at huffingtonpost.com/Yetta. In the news this week, the United States Supreme Court agreed to take up the issue of marriage equality, leaving both marriage equality advocates as well as anti-marriage, I guess we can call them advocates, on the edge of their seats. Down the road in the U.S. Senate, Republicans successfully blocked the U.S. signing onto a treaty recognizing the rights of the disabled, despite the treaties being based on a U.S. law signed by George Bush Sr. Here in New York, our state Senate Republicans were already trying to back away from commitments to increase the minimum wage and reform election finance that they made last week. Ground was broken on the huge new Hudson Yards development on Manhattan's West Side, and the spire of the World Trade Center began to rise. In a real you don't hear this every day story, the NYPD sources credited the drop in crime in Red Hook, Brooklyn after Superstorm Sandy to efforts of the Occupy Sandy movement. We'll be talking tonight about marriage, the state senate, political power, and artistic, creative responses to all of it right here on Yetta Kurland Live with Nathan Schaefer, Antonino D'Ambrosio, Martine Perna, and Morgan Pehme. That is a mouthful. Let's welcome our first guest, Nathan Schaefer. Schaefer has worked on the front lines of the LGBT and health activism for years, including at the AIDS Alliance in Washington, D.C., at the Gay Men's Health Crisis here in New York. In October of this year, he came on as the executive director of the Empire State Pride Agenda. I'm thrilled it brings him here to Yetta Kurland Live tonight. If you've got questions or comments about Empire State Pride Agenda or their agenda in Albany, at City Hall, around the country, please give a call, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Nathan, good to have you on tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. What do you think about it being 12-12-12?
I think, I didn't realize, but that was the last time that's going to happen in this century, which I'm pretty sure means that's the last time that's going to happen in my lifetime.
I'm impressed that you have the mathematical prowess to figure that out. I would not have that acumen. Were you a math major?
No, no. Believe it or not, I just have an iPhone.
Yeah, well... I think the iPhone is the 0101, but yeah. It's 1 up, 1 2 1 2. It's similar.
Yeah, it helps with the math.
So for our listeners who don't know, although probably many of them do, What is the Empire State Pride Agenda, and how does it interact with other advocacy and service organizations in New York?
Sure. The Empire State Pride Agenda is the New York statewide premier LGBT rights organization. We have a presence across the state of New York, and we advocate for full equality and justice for all LGBT New Yorkers in every region of the state. We're headquartered here in New York City, but we also have an office in Albany and have supporters, board members, and allies across the state. We have a strong New York City agenda as well, but we're fundamentally a statewide
Now, is the New
organization.
York City agenda different than the homosexual agenda, or is that one and the same?
That's a tough one. I would say there's some overlap.
There's some overlap
Yeah.
there. Good. In fact, you guys were pivotal in winning marriage equality in years past. What are the big items on the agenda this year for Empire State Pride Agenda?
Sure. The immediate and ultimate legislative priority at this point is the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act.
Agenda as well.
Gender. That's absolutely right. It's passed the
So
Assembly.
agenda is on your agenda.
Gender is at the forefront of our agenda in 2013.
That is actually really admirable. For our listeners, what is gender?
Gender is a bill that would extend statewide protections from discrimination based on gender identity or expression. And it's important to note that this would make New York State the 17th state where protections from discrimination based on gender identity or expression are expressly prohibited under the law.
Under the law, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think specifically those of us who live in New York City have this sense that New York State is on the forefront, flagship, if you will, in the country for progressive values. We've seen it with marriage equality, and unfortunately, like you said, there are already 16 states that have laws for transgendered or gender nonconforming individuals.
Right.
Is it alarming or is it concerning that New York State still lags behind?
Absolutely. We are absolutely behind the curve in terms of joining these other 16 states and the District of Columbia that have these protections in place. And I think it's important to also note you acknowledge living in New York City and how sometimes that can feel distinct from other parts of the state. And what's important to acknowledge is that there are actually 10 municipalities across the state of New York where there are local ordinances that have these protections in place. New York City
Luckily,
has been
New
one
York
for
City
a long
being
time.
one of them.
And only 2 short weeks ago, Syracuse became the 10th. What this means is now 60% of New Yorkers live in areas where there are protections from discrimination for transgender individuals. So the gender bill only extends those protections to the additional 40% who remain unprotected. And it's also important to acknowledge that we've had these protections in place for 60% of New Yorkers, and they've been in place for years without significant implementation challenges. These are not controversial measures.
The sky hasn't fallen in the New York City area having these passed?
Not at all. Not in New York City, not in Rochester, not in Buffalo, not in all the places in New York State where they've been in place.
Yeah, we're joking, but you're actually bringing up some really important issues. And before I get into some of the specific challenges that you're facing with gender, so let's talk about some of the cities in New York State. Does Buffalo have laws?
Yes.
And Rochester?
Yes. Rochester actually was the first place where there was.
I've always thought that Rochester is a more progressive city when you think about upstate New York.
I don't know if I would.
It's Kodak.
If I can politically say it's more progressive or anything.
It's
politically
differently
than others.
progressive.
It absolutely is. I mean, I can tell you one of the things that I have done in my first few weeks on the job was take a tour, quote, upstate to sort of meet our supporters and allies in Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and in Albany. And in Rochester, there is a cohesive community. There is a visible presence. For a relatively small city, there's certainly some very mighty and dedicated advocates and supporters, and it's really refreshing to see.
You are listening to Nathan Schaefer here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 Equality Pride Radio. Please call us with questions or comments of your own, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. So were you involved with efforts around marriage equality when that was happening?
I was in my former role at Gay Men's Health Crisis. That was certainly top on their legislative priorities at the time.
How does the right to marry impact folks who benefit from the services of GMHC?
Well, there's actually quite a number of arguments to be made that people who are in married, committed relationships actually have less of an HIV risk. That's been proven time and again. So there's definitely some promotion therein. There's also some, when we think anything about the state policy agenda and the economic realities that the state is facing, marriage equality was actually something that could generate revenue for the state of New York. And whenever we think about the budget and the realities of having to balance that, that was certainly something that we made as a strong fiscal argument when I was working there.
That's interesting. So, obviously, marriage equality, it's easy now to look back and say, marriage equality, that was easy. Gender is going to be hard. How do we change the hearts and minds of people dealing with gender nonconformity and, girls being boys and boys being girls, and it's the end of the world. But actually, if you look at the legislative fight in New York State for marriage equality, it was a long fight.
Yep.
It wasn't necessarily a straight trajectory. There were a lot of hardships, and 10, 20 years ago, people laughed at the idea of winning the right to marry. So how has the struggle for marriage equality in New York State been different for you as you start out on this journey for passing gender?
Sure. I think I'll just give an example of what I went through in my personal life. 8 years ago, I was in graduate school in Cleveland, Ohio, when the state of Ohio had a ballot measure that made a prohibition of same-sex marriage a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
And that was only 8 years ago. And that, as a political tactic 8 years ago, was very successful in terms of driving out the conservative vote. Here we are 8 years later, which in the political grand scheme of things is a blink of one eye, right? And now you have ballot measures in 4 states, arguably 4 states that might even be more conservative than places like New York, that had ballot measures, 3 of them where they legalized same-sex marriage, the other where they turned down a constitutional amendment. So now, 8 years later, a ballot measure in all of these different places in our country is actually advantageous to our movement. I use the R, loosely here. But it worked. It worked really well, and there was resounding victories for marriage. And it's not a stretch to argue that the state of New York had a decisive role in changing the hearts and minds of people across the country. The president, when he came out in his support, not only of LGBT rights and issues, but of marriage equality specifically, indicated what he learned from the struggle in New York, particularly what the religious leaders across the state of New York had helped him reevaluate his position. So I think we have real reason to be very proud of the victory here and what's ensued as a result. Yeah,
it's a little bit easy, I'll keep myself included in this, for our community to kind of rest on our laurels. We just won this big Herculean fight. It's a little hard for us to jump into the next big fight. It's easier to wrap it up and win. It's harder to start it out when people tell us it'll never happen and don't try and it's going to be too difficult and you'll never see that in your lifetime. What are some of the strategies that you guys are using to bring some of the great fighters and smart organizers who were so successful with marriage equality into the gender fold? And has it been difficult to get those same actors involved in this fight? Have you seen any difficulties just within our own community in terms of resistance around dealing with gender nonconformity?
Yeah, it is a very different discourse, and it's surprising in many ways because some arguments that you can make for passage of a gender bill are much more straightforward and less controversial than marriage equality. So here's one example. One of the things that we commonly argue, which is absolutely true from a legal standpoint, that most people will agree that no hardworking New Yorker should be fired from their job based on their gender identity or expression. And that's what we're talking about when we consider the protections that gender would afford. That people can legally be fired from their jobs, that they can be evicted from their homes, that they can be denied a loan of credit to purchase a car, any number of other things that are not only concerning, in many ways they're life-threatening. So that's a very different, those are almost sort of more straightforward arguments than we had to make for marriage equality. At the same time, I think you're right that we absolutely have to learn from the success of marriage equality, and that's that we have to diversify our messages and our messengers. So one of the things that's proving advantageous to the gender campaign is that we've employed the voices, perspectives, and narratives of police officers who've come out resoundingly saying this is not an issue of public safety. This has actually made certain public safety enforcement measures more simple. It's, again, using the voice of religious religious leaders, and lately we've been employing the voice of the League of Women's Voters.
Great. How have they gotten involved?
They most recently were involved at a legislative hearing that was hosted on the 24th of October by the lead sponsors of the bill, Assemblymember Dick Gottfried and Senator Daniel Squadron, and I'd be remiss not to acknowledge their leadership and dedication to this bill.
And again, isn't it amazing to see our straight allies helping us with this? And kudos to the Empire State Pride agenda also for taking on such a, again, difficult issue and taking it on so directly. It's really quite incredible to see.
Thank you. Thank you. We're proud to do it. It is our duty and responsibility to see this through.
Powerful stuff, getting outside of ourselves and fighting for the fact that boys will be girls here on Yetta Kurland Live. Let's go to some of our callers. We're going to go to Stacy at the Stonewall Inn. Stacy Lentz, I believe. Is that you?
Hey, Yetta, how are you?
Great. Thanks for calling in.
No problem. And congratulations that you finally came out, that you're running. We're all excited.
Oh, thank you. Do you have a question for Nathan?
I certainly do. First of all, Nathan, thank you again for all the work the Empire State Pride agenda did for getting marriage equality passed in New York. So my question is more about on a federal level with DOMA going into the Supreme Court. What are your feelings on a timeline of when we could hear a verdict on this case? And do you think that the court is up to popular opinion in terms of what the decision may be?
It's a great question. Thank you, Stacy. It's and I'm glad that she raised it, because as we talk about the victory of marriage equality in New York State, again, we would be remiss not to talk about the bigger overarching national DOMA, which obviously a significant portion of our rights are housed in those federal rights. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
of course. Thank you for your question. You don't need to thank me in terms of the Pride Agenda's work in marriage equality and all of our other things. It's our duty and responsibility, as I was saying, but I do thank you for the congratulations nonetheless. We should expect to hear some outcome of the Supreme Court deliberations by June of 2013. So that's the timeline that we're working with here. So it should have some kind of an outcome in the first half of next year. The potential outcomes are numerous. They could go in any number of directions. I think the ideal outcome would be that they would determine that the Defense of Marriage Act is in fact unconstitutional, and as a result of that, in places like New York, where the state has recognized same-sex marriages, we would be afforded the federal protections of marriage equality that come along with that. And just to name a couple of those from a practical matter include having the ability to jointly file your taxes, which is something that I think we can all agree is long overdue for folks to have that option. And the other is that there's, one could argue that there's a discriminatory practice in the way in which same-sex couples aren't regarded in the same way as heterosexual couples when it comes to immigration policies. And having the ability to sponsor your spouse's application for a green card, the reality is that until we either have federal recognition of our marriages or comprehensive immigration reform, that is not the reality now.
So, and just to make that clear, because I think it does really hit home, just the intense deprivation of liberties that Americans face. If you have a partner who is from another country, if you are heterosexual, if your marriage was recognized under federal laws like heterosexual counterparts are, you could sponsor your partner under your family relationship to have a green card, a permanent residency here in this country. There is no provision whatsoever at this juncture for same-sex marriage for a couple to be able to do that.
That's correct.
That's life or death for a relationship and for a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing I just think it's important to clarify is that even with heterosexual couples, that is still an arduous and complicated process. That's by no means it's sort of
you don't
given.
snap your fingers and you automatically
But we should, if it's difficult for straight people, it should be difficult for us.
Right.
We should have the same rights and opportunities and options to live our lives freely, healthily, and as happily as possible.
In the pursuit of happiness, as some document somewhere seems to promise us. You are listening to Nathan Schaefer here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600, Equality Pride Radio. Please call in with questions or comments, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Before we take our next caller, talk to me a little bit. Last time around, one of the things that made us get over the last hurdle there for marriage equality is that we were able to get some of our Republican senators on board as well to go along with what was happening. How can we get them on board for our trans brothers and sisters in this struggle that you're initiating now?
Great question.
And is that happening? And what are you seeing in that?
We continue to work with every member of the state legislature, regardless of what they've done in the past, what we might predict they can do in the future, and regardless of their political affiliation or where they reside across the state of New York. Our duty and responsibility is to educate every member of the legislature, regardless of their political affiliation, about the realities that transgender New Yorkers face in the context of discrimination in many different ways every single day. So I can't make predictions about the coming legislative session, but I can tell you that we are committed to working with every member of the legislature.
Again, amazing work that you're doing. Let's squeeze another caller in, and then I want to talk about some of the specifics and how our listeners can get involved. Okay. Let's go to Douglas from Chelsea. Douglas, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Yetta. Love your show. Thanks for having me.
Sure. You have a question for us?
Sure. My question is, I saw today, the Governor Cuomo has these incredibly popular ratings. Some 75% of the people love him, and he was a big leader for us in marriage and getting marriage passed, and I was wondering, is he going to use some of that, whatever political capital to support our agenda this year, be it agenda or protecting homeless kids or what have you?
Sure.
Again, I can't necessarily make predictions on what any elected official will do, but I can tell you that we are in communication with the governor's office frequently about the ever-evolving needs of the LGBT community, and we're very hopeful that they'll continue to lend their support to our legislative and political priorities.
And the governor was critical in helping marriage equality pass the last time.
He absolutely was, and we have to thank him for his leadership. And as with other elected officials, we have to continue to remind them that the marriage victory was a significant milestone, but it doesn't mean that our work is over.
Sure.
I think it only reiterates that we're capable of enacting significant social change and advancing the movement for full equality and justice, and we need the partnership of everyone in leadership to be able to do that for all of our community.
Well, and it's very interesting because I guess on one level, maybe, to be a little negative, maybe people are thinking, all right, well, they got marriage equality. Why, enough is enough with the gay agenda, with that homosexual agenda already. But at the same time, I think what I'm hearing you say, and as I'm thinking about it, we've trained these incredible organizers from Freedoms of Marriage to ESPA to marriage equality to just people who've been involved, the NYCLU and our, straight partners in a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's some really smart, organized folks out there who know how to message this stuff, and that can be applied to this work now. So specifically, what is ESPA doing? How can folks get involved? What's going on, for people to do stuff, whether it's be in New York City, in Albany, or throughout the state?
Great question. We'd love to have the support of everyone across the state. We always welcome people who are willing to volunteer to support our efforts in any way possible. One of the things that happens each spring that I absolutely have to plug is what's called Equality and Justice Day. This is when we convene in Albany with supporters from across the state to advocate for our legislative agenda. While I would hope that the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act would have been passed and signed into law before April 30th of 2013. If in fact that isn't the reality, we're going to need the support of everyone. And I can't stress enough how much we would welcome the support of people from across the state of New York. Everyone in the city is obviously welcome, but we need folks from everywhere.
When is that? Is it a specific day?
April 30th, 2013. You can find out more information on our website, which is prideagenda.org.
Great. That's wonderful. And if our listeners were to call or wanted to call a legislator tomorrow and talk about this, what would be a number to call, or who should they call, and what would the message be?
You can get all of that off of our website. There's talking points on there, and if you wanted to get anything more that isn't available on the website, you can pick up the phone and call our main number, and One of us can walk you through that. We can even sort of practice a little bit about what that message might look like and how you might communicate that through an email or some other method, whatever would be comfortable for you.
You know, again, in light of the fact that this is really hard work, and we hear stories about people being afraid of who's going to use a bathroom and just like weird things that we really have to honor that this is, and kind of hospice this transition for people's minds and hearts, to let them open their minds and hearts to all ways of being, just as we saw with marriage equality. You know, I also believe that this can and will happen. Maybe you could just share with our listeners one happy story or one situation where, you know, you moved the hearts and minds either of a legislator or just a person knocking on a door or making a phone call that makes you realize that this is something that can actually happen.
Yeah, I can tell you that recently, as part of this visit to these various places upstate, in Syracuse, there was a reception.
Stephanie Miner, by the way, the mayor up there, just an incredible person, and, and a part of making that.
Yeah, the ordinance that just passed, the
Yep.
mayor's office was very supportive, and they've got some really committed staff, and she's chair of Democratic Party.
The county committee,
yeah. And we're thankful for her leadership there. And while I was in Syracuse, I met a couple that were parents, a mother and father. And they came to the reception to learn more about the Pride Agenda and the Campaign for Gender because they have a transgender child who was not in a good place and who was really not safe in the school where they were, and they came to learn about what we were doing, and we had this honest exchange that they didn't understand our community, and they had recently realized that it directly impacted their family and their family's safety and well-being. And so they were willing to educate themselves, which they explained to me was a lengthy process, but they had come to a really supportive, respectful, and open place where they wanted to learn more and learn about what they could do. Mm-hmm. And it was very touching to me because they clearly came from a different part of the state where I live. They had different realities and experiences before they had this direct family exposure. And in only a couple of years' time, they've really turned around their levels of acceptance. And that was really very touching to see.
That's amazing, and there are lots of those kinds of amazing stories. I'm reminded of one of my favorite movies, Ma Vie en Rose. Have you ever seen that movie? It's a great movie. Our listeners should tune in, check it out as well. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for the work that you're doing.
You're welcome.
And thanks for just everything that ESPA does. One more shout out for your website. Is it EmpireStatePrideAgenda.org?
It's just prideagenda.org.
prideagenda.org. Nathan, thank you so much. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Antonino D'Ambrosia here on Yetta Kurland Live.
I'm always proud to be a New Yorker.
WWRL, sharing and celebrating the LGBT community's ideas, energy, and accomplishments.
But tonight, I am especially proud to be a New Yorker.
1600.
We are back here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 Equality Pride Radio. Before we go to Antonino D'Ambrosia, we're going to talk to our good friend Morgan Pehme, who is the editor-in-chief of City and State New York. They recently published their Power 100 list of New York City's power brokers. I'm delighted to have them on the show with us tonight to talk about these folks.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, Morgan, we have had you on for the 40 under 40 discussion, obviously. Is this list basically the 100 over 40 list? Is that what this is?
Something like that. Well, actually, what we really wanted to do was establish for our readers who are really consummate political insiders who really are the 100 most powerful people in New York City politics, who are the people who are the movers and shakers in government. And what's striking about our list, I think, for your readers whose lives don't revolve around City Hall, is that a lot of the most powerful people in politics are not people that you've necessarily heard of, yet they still wield a disproportionate influence in city government.
It's really true. So, and it's a very, very interesting group of people. And as you read through the pages, there really is a tremendous amount of power between those pages in the City and State edition. What was your criteria in putting this together? What were you looking at? How did you define power? I heard you saying New York City specific, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about what that was.
Yeah, well, I mean, for instance, we have Rupert Murdoch on our list at number 11. Now, if you're looking at the outsized influence in the entire world, you might put Rupert Murdoch higher up on that list, or you might put someone like Jamie Dimon on that list. But we were really looking specifically at New York City politics and about who can get legislation passed, who has the influence in the mayor's office and the city council. And so we had a pretty, I think, stringent criteria in that respect, and we went to a lot of experts in New York City government, the insiders, and we asked their perspective, and that's how we kind of put together this list. And there's a great temptation in putting something together like this where you're like, okay, we want to have all these representative groups. We want to have X number of women, X number of minorities.
Right.
And though
it may not be that power skews that way exactly proportionally.
That's interesting. You said that, our list has 20 women on it.
Yeah,
and
I noticed that.
That might seem like a really small number, but you know what? That's about 20% of Congress is female.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's representative of these larger dynamics.
How many folks of color was there diversity?
There are 21 on the list. And that was very striking for us too. That it's not until John Liu is the first person of color coming in at number 10 as comptroller, and the first African American is at number 22, Keith Wright, the chair of the Manhattan Democratic Party and of the state Democratic Party.
So we've been able to talk about both of the Democratic county chairs this evening. I don't know what that is, but Stephanie Miner earlier and now Keith Wright.
Yes, Stephanie Miner. We don't have her on this list because she's a statewide player.
Right, that's right.
But she has emerged as a real powerhouse, and when we do this list next year for the state list, we certainly will have her, prominently placed there.
So you're going to do the statewide as well. I was thinking your top three people. Shockingly, Michael Bloomberg came in first place. I thought actually Christine Quinn would come in second place, but I think that's right that Andrew Cuomo comes in second place.
There's an argument to be made that Andrew Cuomo is even number one because the state government calls a lot of the shots for city government, and Andrew Cuomo is an immensely powerful governor. But we have a billionaire mayor who is also a media mogul and who was able to even bring about a third term. So we felt that although
I hadn't heard about the third term, Morgan. What
yes, that happened a few years ago, and people are just coming to terms with that now. But next year when we revisit this list, Mayor Bloomberg will likely drop down, and the new mayor will perhaps take the number one spot, but Andrew Cuomo will certainly be in the running as well. Yeah, just so many interesting parts of this. Also, I noticed Chuck Schumer number 4, but Kirsten Gillibrand all the way down, well, not down too far, but is she 15 or 14? So maybe some disparity there. Now, obviously, she's a younger, in terms of tenure, senator, but that's interesting as well when you talk about gender differences. And also the fact that Chuck Schumer is a New Yorker. He's a Brooklynite. Yeah. His wife was the former DOT commissioner. He is he was reared here in New York City politics, and so Kirsten Gillibrand, being from upstate, didn't have the same constituency. Of course, she's a junior senator, and her star is on the rise. Right. But we knew that this list would be assailed if we didn't do a really good job, and the fact that I haven't received an immense amount of death threats is an indication to me that it's not too far off, despite the fact that it's subjective. And this is interesting. I think if Michael Bloomberg had come in at second place and Cuomo is in first place, I suspect the mayor might have been a little bit upset, although I think Cuomo is probably just fine with wherever he places in, although maybe that is something that you have to think about as well. But I am thinking 1, 2, and 3. I'm thinking 3 men in a room. I'm just thinking on a local level in New York City, the Cuomo, Bloomberg, Quinn trio. It certainly has a lot to do with what happens in New York City. Yeah, and what's interesting is that number 6 on the list is a name that probably most New Yorkers haven't heard, which is Patty Harris. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, there's an argument that she might be and for our listeners, who is Patty Harris? She's the first deputy mayor. She's the right hand of the mayor's. She is his his main counsel. She's also the head of his foundation. And so she is as influential in the Bloomberg administration as anybody. And, and that's what I was talking about, that it's not necessarily the people who are in front of the cameras or who have these high-profile positions who are wielding an incredible amount of influence.
In fact, there's a whole kind of flank of deputy mayors that wield incredible power in New York City. I think number 7 is also a deputy mayor, Cass Holloway, also a deputy mayor. But I just want to say, and then coming in at number 5, I mean, you know, so Chuck Schumer number 4, but of course Sheldon Silver number 5, obviously the as head of the assembly. Was it difficult for you to decide who was 4 and 5 in that? Because you could also kind of go either way with that.
Well, choosing every single person on this list for the most part was a struggle, and you know, we went back and forth with the list, and we were consulting with so many people because credibility was so important to us. Chuck Schumer, just although we weren't looking at his national influence, wields so much power in this country that we felt that, you know, he was worthy. And also, if Sheldon Silver hadn't been embroiled in the Vito Lopez scandal this year and kind of taken a bit of a hit there, you know, that might have been a different consideration as well.
Let me ask you one last question. Number 3, Christine Quinn, our Speaker of City Council. Rewinding back to the Gifford Miller days, and he also obviously ran for, made a run for mayor. Would he weigh in as number 3 if you were to do this back when he was the speaker, or if you fast forwarded him to be the speaker today?
Well, what's interesting about the speaker's role is, you know, in a lot of ways, Christine Quinn has been construed as the presumptive mayor because she is the speaker of the city council. But Gifford Miller once was in that position, and Peter Vallone Sr. was in that position before then too, and both of them kind of went down to ignominious defeat in the mayoral election, and that's in part because the Speaker of the City Council, although she has a citywide position, she represents one very small district,
right?
And so in a lot of ways, she has been up in front of just a small electorate, and so. You know, even though she has this outsized influence, it's not necessarily representative of how much people know her or how many votes she's garnered over time. So, you know, Gifford Miller was supposed to be the mayor, and he, you know, he didn't even place in the top 3 on election day.
And I guess what I'm saying is, given that she still came in at number 3, so obviously she has a role or a perception, as often politics is in large part perception, that is amplified much larger than maybe prior speakers. And why do you think that is? Is it her close relationship with the mayor? Is it her ability to get out? And I think she does make a good name for herself. She has a lot of name recognition.
I mean, certainly her relationship with the mayor has empowered her to a great deal. Unfortunately, our legislative bodies, both on the state level and the city level, or perhaps fortunately, are very much dominated by their leader. The members themselves are far less influential. And so, Christine Quinn, if you see a piece of legislation that moves through the city council, you can be sure that it has the speaker's approval, or the speaker is behind it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we're looking at who can really get legislation passed, who's driving the agenda in our city, we felt that Christine Quinn was enormously influential in that respect. I mean, she's setting the agenda. Quick
final question for you. Was there somebody who you really wanted to get into these 100 most powerful and didn't get into the list, that you were remorseful maybe that didn't get into the list?
Well, it's not a matter of remorse because I wasn't trying to, impose my own feelings upon this. And in a lot of ways, politicians that you become to befriend or admire, you realize, I really like them, but at the end of the day, how powerful are they? I think that someone like Kathy Wild, who is number 19 on our list, is a fascinating person. Her organization, Partnership for New York City, if your listeners are unfamiliar with it, I urge them to Google it. I mean, if there is an Illuminati-type organization in New York City, it's Partnership for New York City. Their board of directors is like the Fortune 500 boiled down into one room, and this is the woman who is at the helm there.
Yeah.
And so every politician in the city goes to kiss the ring with Kathy Wild, and she is an enormously powerful, smart, and capable person, but she's not a person who's necessarily on most registers on most people's Richter scale.
At least in the general public.
Precisely.
Morgan, thank you so much again for your insight, your wisdom on this stuff. It's always great to have you on the show. We'll have you back again soon. We're going to take a short break, listen to some music from Antibalas, and when we come back, we'll be talking to folks from Let Fury Have the Hour here on Yetta Kurland Live.
not the flow. Dirty, not dirty money, oh. Dirty money, not the flow. Oh yeah. Man go drowning in the river. He call his brother, save me now. His brother showed up in the copter. And toss him going where not the flow. Dirty, not dirty money, oh. Dirty money, not the flow. Dirty, not dirty money, oh. Dirty money, not the flow. The man go hanging from our window. They call him Uncle Benny now. Uncle toss him rope of money. The money break, the man go follow. Dirty, not dirty money, oh. Dirty money, not go hold up. I say, oh, dirty, not dirty money, oh. Dirty money, not the flow,
All right, and we are back here on Yetta Kurland Live. Our next guests are I'm big fans of, not just the movie, but also the filmmaker. Antonino D'Ambrosio is a writer, filmmaker, visual artist, and author. D'Ambrosio is the founder of La Luta Numidia Collective, and his writing has appeared in The Nation, The Progressive, The Believer, Salon.com, and many, many other publications. His film, Let Fury Have the Hour, is premiering on Friday. This upcoming Friday, the day after tomorrow, Antonino?
That's right.
It's coming up at the Quad Cinema in Greenwich Village, and I am thrilled not only to have the show airing in my neck of the woods, but also to have him back on the show tonight on Yetta Kurland Live to talk with us. And with Antonino is Martin Perna, whose music you just heard, an acclaimed musician and founder of the groundbreaking New York Afro-pop band Antibalas. Perna is featured in the film, and Antibalas is currently touring with the eponymous sixth album, some of which you just heard. They'll be playing at the Brooklyn Masonic Temple on Friday night. If you've got questions or comments for Antonino or Martine, please give a call in now, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. I cannot talk enough about Let Fury Have the Hour. It breaks down music, art, culture, politics in a creative, inventive, and just really genius way. Perfectly timed to come out right around. Did it come out before or after the kind of climax of the Occupy movement down in Zuccotti Park? I feel like it was like right around that same time.
It was before. No, it was right around the same time. Yeah, it was right around the same time, exactly. And, and now it's coming out.
Did you know the Occupy movement was going to be happening when this you planned that stuff, right?
It's funny, and as I was making it, there was always something happening in the world that kind of reaffirmed and validated what I was doing. You know, Egypt was happening the year before. You know, everything happening in the Arab Spring. You know, what was happening with Ai Weiwei in China, and then of course Occupy. So it's just it says something about the.
So for folks who haven't seen the movie, it's about creative response to oppression in a few of the eras, the kind of Reagan and Thatcher era. We just heard some of the track called Dirty Money. What are you responding to there? I'm going to ask a question for you, Martine.
Well, in the song Dirty Money, just to back up, a lot of our songs have political themes that the roots of the music are Nigeria or West Africa, but it's a protest music that on one hand is very trying to create commentary, on the other hand it's celebratory, so it's not trying to bang your head over with a political message and make you feel horrible and miserable, but rather to kind of stir you up. So Dirty Money in particular talks about this massive transfer of wealth that really happened. It kind of dovetails with the film because all of this, a lot of different financial deregulation and really opening up the floodgates for, rather than money going to where it needs to and spread out among the public through social services, through good paying jobs, through opportunities, is going upwards through different changes in taxation. It also talks about the idea of disaster capitalism.
Yeah, disaster capitalism. We need to start talking about that, definitely.
And these, what are termed as growth industries, like the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, that generate a lot of money but are really parasitic industries as far as healthy economies for the nation. So, in this very happy sounding song, we try to take all that on.
I like two things. One, what's really exciting is to see the way that musicians are interacting with the politics of their music and how that reflects with a bigger social and political context. So, to listen to Martine or I think Billy Bragg is in the movie and speaks as well. And just the kind of creative genius and the political genius that comes out of these folks who are creating incredible music. Martine, how did you become politicized, if you will? Was that always part of your music, or was music there before the politics, or how did that all happen?
There's a lot of different things. Some of my family in Mexico in the 30s and 40s, they had a bookstore there, a political bookstore, and then certain political exiles from other parts of the world stayed at my family's house in Mexico City. And then in the early 80s, I saw during the Reagan era, my grandfather ran unsuccessfully for a Democratic seat in Philadelphia to an incumbent, and his platform seems really radical now, but it was just like no nukes. Make sure old people have what they need, invest in education. And it's like,
that's awesome.
But it shows how much the sort of political debate has moved further to the right, and sometimes who we see as our best candidates are actually just very, middle of the road. But, so just different things in my family, and then in high school getting involved, particularly around environmental issues. Our township had a, recycling law, but our high school wasn't recycling. So we were just scratching our heads like, well, why did they say do this and they make you do it at home? But then the school, we go through so much paper and cans and all this stuff. So did that and environmental education stuff. And I kind of came to music pretty late in life, and but it was right on time.
Well, and it's awesome. I mean, your work is incredible. It's inspiring. People can connect to it. It's such a great venue to bring the kind of messages. And when we talk about creative response, we're really talking about abundance and the opposite of kind of the politics of fear that we see in the conservative movements. So it just resonates for all of us who are creative souls who dare to dabble in the politics of it all. Antonino, so the Occupy movement kind of happened when this movie came to fruition. Obviously, you had been working on it for a while. I almost feel like you could have a part 2 and a part 3 of Let Fury have the second hour and the third hour or something.
Right.
I mean, Martine mentioned disaster capitalism. Obviously, we're living now in a post-Sandy New York. What do you think all that is, and how does that relate to the movie?
Well, I think that the one thing, I want to take a step back and say, even with your work, Yetta, what Martine and Antibalas have continued to do is a great example of creative response in terms of the fact that it's about human possibility, and it's about mining human possibility, tapping into that, which is really kind of this limitless resource. And politics and media and culture is about constricting and restricting that. It's I often say that what Let Fury Have the Hour taps into in terms of creative response is about, it's what we do. It's what we can gather together to do, join together to do. And, as we've seen with what's happened with Sandy or any of these issues, that these obstacles and problems that really challenge us, is that the country as a whole, in terms of the structure governmentally or politically, is really ill-equipped to deal with that, because they're not living in the realm of creative response. They're still rooted in the bad ideologies that have, of the past, which means that the governance is out of touch and out of step with where we need to be at this critical point in the 21st century. And creative response is always about creating a language that translates into the future. And that's what we're trying to really, really experience here. So, when I listen to Antibalas, and I see the work that you're doing as well as a lawyer and as an activist, these are the things that I'm interested in. This is what the film is trying to discuss. There are not solutions to these problems. There's only the next good idea to deal with the next problem. So, it's very inspirational for me to hear what Martine continues to do now into an over decade-long career just with Antibalas. And that is what the aspiration is, that we all need to have to continue to mine creative response for those good ideas.
It's so well said. And, again, thinking about the future, we have just gone through this incredible storm that has devastated our neighbors, and we're still dealing with it tremendously. Look at what's happening in Far Rockaways. Look at how communities of color, poorer communities, are adversely impacted by that. Obviously, I think New Yorkers have been incredibly compassionate in this process, but it's a big issue. Climate change, the fact that New York City is an island city. And we do need to start thinking about what the future holds for us. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences or your perceptions of Hurricane Sandy. I said in the introduction, one of the incredible things we're talking about Occupy is the advent of Occupy Sandy and the incredible way that they have brought communities together, and the way that people have been open to receive that kind of generosity. And the fact that the NYPD is even giving them credit for helping to reduce the crime out in the Far Rockaways.
Well, I have to say that there's a good friend of mine named Michael Spuddick, who lives in the Far Rockaway, who's been updating me really a lot about what's been happening, because I live in a part of New York in Fort Greene that was almost untouched, which really kind of brought into sharp focus just how fragile this existence really is, where you have neighbors a mile or two away in Red Hook who were completely devastated. The idea is that we change things, people change things.
Yeah.
And you see that in what really happened here.
Yeah.
In the government and social institutions that are supposed to be supporting us have not been able to do so. It's the people,
Yeah.
And the resilience of that is really the perfect metaphor of the human spirit, which, again, is something that's embedded in my film.
That's true.
And also
and
Martine's
let's talk
record.
about your film and where people go. Antonino D'Ambrosio and our friend here from Antibalas, Martine Perna. Let's take a caller if we can. We're going to go to Eric from Queens. Eric, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hey, Yetta, thanks for having me on.
Sure. Do you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, when we have Republicans in office, there tends to be a lot of creativity in the arts and a lot of, generation stuff. But now we have Obama. There's not so much going on. Is that the bad thing to have?
I don't know. Let's ask our guests. Martine, what do you think about that?
Well, we just made our fifth record. We started as a band in the Clinton era, and we were, singing about the bombing of pharmaceutical factories in Sudan and torture, during that time. I think there's always critiques. It's just sort of how much you frame them. And, we haven't stopped with Obama. I think Obama and Bush were definitely different presidents in a lot of their directions and values. But there's a lot going on that still stinks, that's still horrible. It's not democratic. It's totally infused with the influence of big money. And, so I think for musicians and artists in general who are really paying attention, there's always things to critique, and it's just the way that you critique them, because at the same time, we don't necessarily want to undermine Obama in the sense that he has, it's people like us that elected him, so we're hoping that he's representing our interests in a way, but we're not going to stop applying gentle and constructive pressure.
It's a good way to say it. I don't know if you heard our segment before this, Morgan Pehme from City and State, who was talking about the 100 most powerful. Had you seen that article or talked? It was all about these really incredibly powerful people, really being the power brokers of New York City. What does that say about politics in New York, and how do we change that kind of that influence of a few people influencing all of us so powerfully?
Well, part of it is developing leadership at a young age, giving young people opportunities to be, to follow people around who have a lot of integrity, who have proven themselves to be accountable to the people as opposed to big money, and see how that works. And then be part of positive things where there's a goal and they get it done, even if it's something very small, and build on that.
Great.
And that's what was really, I think, exciting. We were on tour in Europe when we left 2 days before Sandy hit, but people were asking us about Occupy all the time, and that was practice for true democracy in the sense. And when a crisis hit, people had those bonds of trust and integrity built, and communication, and knowing that we're here for mutual aid, and then that was activated.
Yeah.
So all these these are practice. Democracy takes a lot of practice, and having better leaders means that we have to start we have to be much. It's not going to happen automatically. Just
Yeah.
because we live in quotes, a democracy doesn't mean that people grow up knowing how to be democratic or function or be leaders.
Well, and I think one of the points in Antonino's movie is that a lot was undone during the Reagan era with public interest and public care for people. It was all privatized in a lot of ways. A lot of the regulations, a lot of the protections were taken care of, were removed in essence.
I mean, a lot of what we see in terms of how the consciousness of a generation and generations that have followed, how that shifted. You know, Reagan really launched a harsh brand of individualism to the point that he created such a context that to think of yourself as an individual was truly a selfless act.
Yeah.
To care, to help, was considered
selfish,
vain, and you're selfish for personal attention. So what it did is it stripped the core idea of democracy, of collective provision, of taking active participation in the world around you, which is citizenship, of compassion, which is our greatest strength as human beings. And now that the overlay in society is cynicism.
Yeah.
And when you have a cynical society, then you have a situation where people are reluctant to participate. You've created submissiveness, inaction,
and
repression, and also ahistorical consciousness.
Great. We're out of time. It's an incredible movie. Just plug it one more time. It's going to be this Friday at the Quad.
At the Quad.
Check it out.
I'll be doing 5 Q&As. The first one, it's for the 7:25 screening at the Quad on Friday, December 14th. LeftFuryHaveTheHour.com. Please come out.
Martin, Antonino, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for the work that you're doing. We'll have you back on again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
The preceding program was independently produced. The views and opinions expressed were those of the program host and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of WWRL, its staff, or management.